biosphere. A complex, subtly balanced life support system.
We're not on Earth.
It's got to be Earth.
We're not on Earth.
It's got to be Earth.
We're not on Earth.
It's got to be Earth. Where are we?
Between light and shadow.
Hey kids, it's Craig, and this is Between Light and Shadow, where we take two classic episodes of the Twilight Zone, two similar classic episodes, I should say, and chew through them till we find the gooey center and see which one tastes better. Now, despite what that confusing pastiche of clips you just heard might suggest, tonight's episodes absolutely, unequivocally, positively take place on Earth. Good old terra firma, the world we know, Earth Prime, Sector 001. In fact, it's right in the title of our first episode, Third from the Sun. We're staying close to home this week. No exotic alien planets here, no sirree Bob. This lovely piece of music that opens the episode is called Songe by French composer René Chalon. It's a 1957 track from the CBS Music Library. This is actually a longer piece than what you hear in the episode. I actually pulled it from a different TZ episode, A World of His Own. And it certainly is idyllic, but its appearance here is a bit of a misdirect, since nothing in this episode will feel even remotely idyllic. In fact, it doesn't even jibe with the first thing we see, a hydrogen power plant, complete with a droning, sizzling sound that frankly sounds a bit ominous. We see a security gate where the employees are checking out for the day.
Parkinson, chemical warfare. Amberley, hydrogen armament. Mills, germ warfare research. Sturka, hydrogen armament. You boys are pretty busy up there, aren't you?
Very.
Now that's our protagonist, one of them anyway, William Sturka, Hydrogen Armament Division. He's played by Fritz Weaver, a very recognizable Twilight Zone face, but not necessarily for his work here. He'll play the far more memorable Chancellor who declares librarian Burgess Meredith to be
obsolete.
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 in Season 2's The Obsolete Man, incidentally, one of my all-time favorites.
In a few moments, you'll be cringing and pleading just like they all do. Oh, yes, indeed, you fit. You've got a worthless, miserable little life, but you've also got an instinct for survival. And in a few minutes, when you feel life slipping away, when you feel that your survival is just a question of minutes, we'll see then which is the stronger, Mr. Wordsworth, the state or the librarian.
Fritz Weaver returned to the Twilight Zone for the 80s revival in The Star, which is based on the classic Arthur C. Clarke story, which we might be looking at as part of our holiday episode this year. Stay tuned. Now, we've been talking about Ray Bradbury's The Martian Chronicles here and there lately. Well, Weaver played Father Peregrine in the 1980 TV miniseries. Weaver started out in the live anthologies of the 1950s, but as far as I can tell, he never acted in anything written by Rod Serling until Third from the Sun. He's one of those actors that you see in almost every TV show throughout the 50s through the 90s. He never had an ongoing role in a series, but he did plenty of TV just the same. He never did an Outer Limits, though, which is too bad. He did 2 episodes of Tales from the Dark Side in the 80s, and in one of them, he played none other than Sir Edmund Halley of Halley's Comet fame. You can also spot him on the big screen in 1982's Creepshow, and more recently, he played the really unfriendly Senator Albert Sorensen on The X-Files.
Are you familiar with the penalties for obstruction of justice? We've been looking into the death of this man outside your apartment, Mr. Skinner, and it's raised some troubling questions, such as what this man was doing on your balcony before he fell to his death. It was your balcony, wasn't it, Mr. Skinner? Perjury is a very serious offense, particularly for an FBI agent.
So it looks like old Bill Sturka's had a rough day. He lights up a smoke and...
Hold the light, will you, Sturka? Long days, huh? Long days. Your department's going full blast, isn't it? It's coming, boy. It's really coming, and a big one, too. While we're talking here, I bet the military's getting all set. Got it all mapped out, I bet. Talk is 48 hours. You wait and see if I'm not right. 48 hours, we'll have 'em aloft. Then whoosh, up, over, and whammo. There goes the enemy. Obliterated, finished.
Carling. Is that his first name or his last name? Like Doug Carling or Skip Carling? Anyway, he's played by Edward Andrews, who will return to the Twilight Zone in Season 5 to do battle with a car from hell in You Drive. But if you were a teenager in the 80s like me, he'll always be Grandpa Howard from the 1984 John Hughes classic 16 Candles.
Oh, sweetheart, my goodness, are you a sight for sore eyes? And oh, good, just look, how are you, my little lamb chop?
Now, I'm sure Edward Andrews was in a ton of stuff, but honestly, I don't even care about his other credits. To me, he's Grandpa Howard, damn it. 16 Candles is one of the movies that my sister Karen and I used to quote from pretty much constantly, along with Three Amigos, Better Off Dead, The Breakfast Club. We still do it a lot, actually, like every time we talk. And hey, I don't know if John Hughes was a Twilight Zone fan necessarily, but right before Grandpa Howard's first appearance in 16 Candles, we hear...
Where are my blue socks, Dorothy?
You mean to tell me you didn't pack them? Oh, not again, Howard. Can't I trust you to do anything? Do you expect me to do all the packing? Well, at least I brought this for you. It's Sam.
Samantha.
Look.
Oh, look.
Hi.
Hi.
Right? It's like John Hughes was acknowledging that Edward Andrews was a TZ vet. Of course, if that was the case, he probably should have done the same thing a few minutes later when we meet Grandpa Fred, played by Max Showalter.
Well, if it isn't Sammy Baker Davis Jr.
Hi, Grandpa.
Oh, I've got one for you. Knock, knock.
Who's there?
Who?
Who?
Helen, we've got an owl out here in the hall.
Fred, leave her alone. You'll make her tinkle.
Max Showalter went by the name Casey Adams until the mid-60s, so that's how he was credited when he played the highly uncomfortable piano player Pat Riley in Season 3's It's a Good Life.
It would be good if you told me what to play, Anthony. It would be real good if you'd tell me what music you'd like to hear.
Just play. Play anything.
All right. I'll play, I'll play Moonglow. That's a nice old tune.
But hey, we'll do a supercut of his 16 Candles lines if and when we get around to covering It's a Good Life. This is Edward Andrews' turn in the spotlight.
Whoosh, up, over, and whammo. There goes the enemy. Obliterated, finished.
But what are they doing in the meantime?
What do you mean, what are they doing? Probably retaliating the best way they can. It's a big waste of time, let me tell you. We get the first licks, so they can't do much.
They can go whoosh, up, over, and whammo.
Absolutely. But not so many. Not so properly aimed. Not so skillfully carried out.
So instead of losing 50 million people, we lose only 35, huh?
You a defeatist, Sturka? That's dangerous thinking. You better mind what you say.
And what I think, too, huh?
Yeah, and what you think.
Good night, Carling. See you tomorrow.
Good night, Carling. Classic Nemesis greeting tone.
Hello, Jerry.
Hello, Newman.
Good night, Jerry.
Good night, Newman.
Okay, so Carling is needling Bill pretty hard, and that line about watching what you think, of course, I'm immediately reminded of George Orwell's 1984. They never really touch on the thought crime angle again, but you definitely get a whiff of some Big Brother action. This is a great Serling exchange. We have an obviously liberal-thinking man arousing the ire and suspicion of a straight and narrow conservative government lackey type. As we'll see, it's actually kind of reckless of Bill to say any of this. Did I say kinda? I mean very. So Bill goes home to unwind and flips on the hi-fi. And what the hell is he listening to? It's a piece called Teddy Blues by French avant-garde composer Jacques Lazare. It's an odd choice of music, but then if you look around the Sturka dwelling, you'll see lots of odd paintings and sculptures. So I'm guessing the Sturkas are some pretty hip hepcats. He looks ready to spark up a doobie and let the pressures of work just melt away. But then his daughter Jody shows up to harsh his potential mellow.
Dad, don't you like your job? Is that the problem?
Job? It's all right. It's a job.
Oh, I mean just having to work on the kind of things that you do. Fever bombs and hydrogen bombs and gas and things like that.
Wait, fever bombs? Is that a real thing? Oh, Google, you're so fine, you're so fun, you blow my mind. Hey, Google. Hey, it doesn't appear so. I mean, bombs and gas are obviously real things, but fever bombs? Is it a bomb that causes everyone in the blast radius to get a fever? Sounds like a form of chemical warfare. Interesting. So it's not a real world weapon, but apparently it is a song by a band called the Technicolors that came out, just this year. I like that a lot. Anyway, between those dreaded fever bombs and the semi-Orwellian vibe, it's starting to look a lot like we're in a dystopian near future and not the present. Or is it perhaps something else?
No, I'm just a cog in the wheel, Jody. I mean, look at it this way. In one bomb, there are perhaps 1,000 pieces, and every piece requires a team of 50, 60, 70 people. Looking at it like that, I'm not quite as responsible as if I...
Everyone I've talked to lately, they've been noticing it. That something's wrong. Something's in the air. That something's going to happen. And everybody's afraid. Everyone, Dad, why?
People are afraid because they make themselves afraid. They're afraid because they subvert every great thing ever discovered. Every fine idea ever thought, every marvelous invention ever conceived. They subvert it, Jody. They make it crooked and devious. Then too late. Far too late, they ask themselves the question, why? And then it's too late. Everything is too late.
That's interesting. He isn't blaming the government or the military. He's blaming everyone for the state of the world. That's either really insightful or, in the current vernacular, woke, or it's a self-delusion to help him cope with the fact that he works in hydrogen armament and is therefore at least somewhat complicit in what may be the end of the world. That's interesting. Fritz Weaver plays a cog in the military war machine here, but in real life, he was a conscientious objector and therefore did not serve in World War II.
Invite Jerry Ryden and his wife over tonight, will you, Eve? We'll have some cards or something. You'll be there, Jody, won't you? He'd like to see you.
Oh, I'm sorry, I can't. I've got a date.
Break it, will you, Jody? I'd like you home tonight.
Why, Dad, I can't. Oh, all right, Dad.
I love the way she says dad there. It's like in her head she's doing air quotes. We have this running joke around the house where we put air quotes on all sorts of things where they don't belong. My mom started doing it several months ago for no apparent reason, like on greeting cards and stuff, to presumably add emphasis to certain words. So, yeah, we're basically making fun of her when we do that. Mom, if you're hearing this, sorry, not sorry. So Bill goes upstairs to sulk since his baby girl's mad at him, and the missus follows him up.
Bill? What is it? What's happening?
Eve, it's too late for subterfuge now. It's too late for anything. It's coming. It's coming probably within 48 hours.
Will it be bad?
It'll be a holocaust. It will be hell. It will be the end of everything we know. People, places, ideas, everything. It will all be wiped out.
In 48 hours?
Maybe sooner.
What can we do?
We're leaving. You and Jody and I and Jerry and Ann. We're leaving tonight.
Leaving? Leaving for where?
I can't tell you that. I can only tell you that sometime between midnight and 1, we've got to be out of here and gone.
Dad? Jerry Ryden's down here. He'd like to talk to you.
I'm coming down, Jody.
What's it mean? Why is he here now?
That's what I want to find out.
So Jerry shows up unannounced, clearly concerned about something.
Evening, Jerry.
Hi, Bill.
Now then, you've come to tell me that you won't be able to make it for cards tonight.
Wait, it was only like a minute and a half ago that Bill told Eve to invite Jerry over for cards. How would Jerry know? Unless it's all part of some clandestine plan.
Are you kidding? It's high stakes tonight, because I've been very hot at cards the last couple of weeks. No, I just dropped by to talk to you about that,
Jerry Ryden is played by Joe Moross, and, like Fritz Weaver, got his start in live TV in the early 50s, showing up in lots of prestigious anthology shows like Lux Video Theater, Kraft Theater, the United States Steel Hour, and Playhouse 90. But like Fritz Weaver, he never appeared in anything written by Rod Serling until his 2 Twilight Zones, Third from the Sun, and The Little People in Season 3.
All my life, I wanted to sit in front of the wagon and hold the reins. Well, what do you think I've got here now? A whole race of little people who look up to me like a giant out of the sky. They're scared, Fletch, petrified, and so they do what they're told. Because this giant is like some avenging angel to them. Graduated, Fletcher, from a slob with a slide rule to a god.
Craig, they're people. They're flesh and blood. In that respect, they're no different than us.
Sure they are. Because they've been created in my image.
If the other voice in that clip sounds familiar, it should. It's Claude Akins, who we spent a bit of time with very recently when we covered The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street. Genre fans can also spot Joe Moross in episodes of Thriller, Alfred Hitchcock Presents, The Fugitive, The Invaders, and yes, even The Outer Limits.
Are you considering that Major Merritt is expendable?
Mr. Jerome, I'd like to explain how the whole picture adds up at this moment. I can inform Captain Buckley that he's to take command of the M2, order him to blast off on time, thus assuring her safe return to Earth. Well, we can simply wait until Major Merritt gets off that rock, regardless of how long it takes. That could mean we could sacrifice both men and the vehicle, plus whatever information they have collected, which would prevent this ever happening in the future.
You haven't asked for my viewpoint, but I feel I must tell you, were I in your place, I wouldn't abandon Major Merritt. It seems cruel and inhuman. And I'm sure the public would react with the utmost revulsion and disapproval.
All astronauts are aware of the risk involved, and they learn to take it.
The episode is The Invisible Enemy, and if the other voice in that clip sounds familiar, you'll be delighted to learn that it's the irrepressible Ted Knight himself, who also turned up on The Twilight Zone in a very early episode called The Lonely.
Hey, we've been here 2 minutes already, and he hasn't asked about the pardon.
How about it, Allenby? You're out of luck, Corey. The sentence reads 50 years. And they're not even reviewing cases of homicide. You've been here 4 years now, so that makes 46 more to go, so make yourself comfortable, huh?
You know, Ted Knight's character in The Lonely was a real dick, but for some reason we didn't memorialize it in our usual fashion when we covered the episode last October. So let's do it now.
You dick!
Better late than never, as they say. Okay, so where were we? Okay, so Jerry shows up unannounced, clearly concerned about something, and suddenly Bill seems to think they're being surveilled, like maybe his house is bugged or something. He throws up a flimsy ruse.
Your watch giving you trouble again?
Yeah.
Yeah, probably that mainspring. Remember, Jerry, I told you it looked like it had some rust on it. Here, let me see it.
Jerry hands Bill his pocket watch, and they do a really cool transition right here. We cut to a close shot of the watch changing hands, then we dolly back, and we're no longer in the entryway of the Sturka house. We're now downstairs in Bill's workshop. He turns on a piece of machinery to create noise to hopefully mask their conversation.
I put a different guard on the ship, on the 1 a.m. shift. The one I know, the one I've paid, gets off at 11.
And we have to leave before 11.
It'll be a lot tougher. There are more men on the field then, more searchlight.
It doesn't make any difference. We're only your relatives with permission to look at the new ship. That's what our credentials will show.
And just the same, the fewer who know, the better.
Does Anne know yet?
Not everything. Only that we're in danger and we've got to get out. I didn't tell her where or when. What about Eve and Jody?
Eve knows now. Jody will stay home tonight. I told her you were coming over. You and Anne to play cards. You can come around 7, can't you?
Yeah.
Little do they know that white-suited stooge Carling is eavesdropping outside the window.
You betcha.
Back from commercial, and there's a tense card game in progress. The Sturkas and the Rydens are playing a game in which they draw cards and say numbers out loud that are divisible by 4, while Jody mopes in the background. The camera is shooting from the middle of the table, moving in a slow circle, stopping on each of the 4 players' faces as they call out their numbers. It's a really clever shot, one that also shows up in the Fun and Games episode of The Outer Limits a few years later. More recently, That 70s Show used the same visual device whenever the characters got high. So anyway, Jerry wins the game when he draws a card and...
7.
You are lucky tonight.
Is this even a real card game?
How about some lemonade and homemade cake, everyone?
Sounds wonderful.
Well, I'll get a tray. I'll help you. Come along, young woman, lend a hand.
I'm surprised she didn't say, "Oh, all right, Mom," with implied air quotes. Jody is played by Denise Alexander, who also started out in live TV, but again, nothing written by Serling. She's best known for her many years on daytime TV on both Days of Our Lives and General Hospital. Jerry's wife, Anne, is played by Jeannie Evans. She acted for less than 10 years, with only 10 credits to her name, yet she managed to show up twice on The Twilight Zone, here and in Season 3's To Serve Man, where she'll play Woman Number 2. At least here her character has a name. But get this, both episodes were directed by Richard L. Baer, who was her husband. In fact, he was the director on exactly half of her total acting gigs. Aside from the 2 Twilight Zones, he also directed her in episodes of Tombstone Territory and 77 Sunset Strip, both in 1958, and The Virginian in 1963, and then nothing. They divorced in 1965, and she never acted again. Bill's wife Eve is played by Laurie March. Not really a big name in the annals of television and film, but she did what no other member of this week's cast did. She did appear in something Serling wrote during the live TV anthology era. Incident in an Alley, a 1955 episode of the United States Steel Hour. I'd play a clip, but as far as I can tell, it's lost, like so many live productions from back then. There might be a kinescope of it at the Paley Center, which means for my purposes, it might as well be on the moon.
I know our destination now. Right
How far?
11 million miles.
11 million miles. In a ship we don't even know will leave the atmosphere.
Whether or not its pilot can either take off or get you down in one piece. That's the risk we've been talking about for months now.
It's a good risk when you consider the alternatives. Now, this place we're going to.
It's populated, Bill. It has people on it. We've picked up radio waves. Even some snatches of a language not dissimilar to ours. We've been able to decipher a lot of it.
So all they have to do is kill some time till it gets late enough, then head over to the base, steal the ship, and hope like hell it can handle all the crazy shit they're asking of it, despite its apparent lack of sufficient testing. Just kick back, eat some cake, drink some lemonade, maybe listen to some of that funky music from earlier. Basically, just chill.
Bill, Mr. Calling's here.
Hi.
Ah, shit. Jerry slaps his written flight plan face down onto the card table as Carling approaches. Some really inventive framing here. The camera is shooting up through the glass table at Bill, Jerry, and Carling.
Hot night, too. This is a night for a front porch. Or sleep. But nothing else.
All right, you are. I've been up north testing an aircraft. Haven't had much sleep the last couple of weeks.
As I know the aircraft. They say it's capable of leaving our atmosphere. Talk is it could go to another planet if the right man flew her.
Ooh.
Well, not for a while yet. Needs a lot more testing.
Oh.
There's a pack of cigarettes sitting next to Jerry's face-down flight plan. Carling reaches for them. Jerry grabs the flight plan and begins scribbling numbers on its backside.
The way I figure it, Mr. Sturka, you owe Ann and me a little money here. Marvelous scientist. Very bad card player.
Oh, I wouldn't have believed that. I would have guessed that Sturka here was a good gambler. I'd have guessed he'd gamble on most anything.
Carling pulls the flight plan out from under Jerry's pencil.
You've lost quite a bit according to this, Sturka.
We won't settle tonight. Next week we'll give you another chance.
Next week? You do plan ahead. You plan way ahead.
A week?
A lot can happen in a week. A lot can happen in 48 hours.
So much tension here. All Carling has to do is flip that piece of paper over and they're sunk. But he doesn't. He casually tosses it back onto the table. On his way out, he F's with Bill a bit more.
Pretty night. Clear as a bell. Nothing but stars. You ever think, Sturka, that there may be people on those stars, too? Maybe people just like us.
That thought has crossed my mind.
Jesus, does he know what they're planning?
Ever think maybe you'd be happier on one of those than you are here?
That thought has crossed my mind, too.
Yeah, I have no doubt.
Oh shit, he's totally onto them.
Oh, so see you a little later, darling. We've got a lot.
Time is now. Jody, I've got something to tell you. We're leaving here tonight. There's a ship at the government field. We're all going to get into the car and drive over there now. We've bribed a lot of people, and the ship's loaded with supplies, enough to last us a long time.
You've been planning this.
For 3 months now. But tonight has to be it, Jody. Tonight's the last chance. We've got to leave here tonight.
Why tonight, Jerry?
Because this world as we know it won't exist much longer. It's about to blow itself up, and that may happen by morning.
Well, in the morning, where will we be?
We'll be out in space, Jody. Far out. We've got to answer it.
That's not a door chime. That's the telephone. And what an odd telephone it is, too. Believe it or not, it's not a mocked-up, near-futuristic prop. That's an actual working phone. For more, let's consult,
Media.
The Ericophone is a one-piece plastic telephone created by the Ericsson Company of Sweden and marketed through the second half of the 20th century. It was the first commercially marketed telephone to incorporate the dial and handset into a single unit. Because of its styling and its influence on future telephone design, the Ericophone is considered one of the most significant industrial designs of the 20th century. It is in the collection of the Museum of Modern Art in New York City. In Sweden, the Ericophone is known as the cobra telephone for its resemblance to a coiled snake.
Hello.
Hey, Doc. It's Craig. What's up?
What's up?
Hey, you. Hey, so we're talking about Third from the Sun here on the podcast. And we got to the scene where Sturka gets the phone call from his boss.
Nice.
And it's a really wacky phone.
It is.
And I know that you, of all people, are very familiar with this wacky phone because...
I have one!
You have one of your very own. Tell me about it.
It is the weirdest thing ever. There's like no real way to describe this thing. It's probably about maybe 3 pounds. It's one piece, so the good old rotor from the rotary phone is on the bottom.
Yes.
So it's like standing on the rotary phone thing.
Right.
It's curved really strange.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of weird things about the way it looks. It was also in One More Pallbearer.
Yes.
It's a small role in there. And it's like one of the things that they try to sell it as being this thing that comes in all sorts of colors, and it's like the phone of the future. And you can Google all of these Ericophone ads, and they like try and show you all of these different pictures of them and different colors. So it's kind of like a handset, but with the actual phone in one, like, you know, a really, really, really early cell phone, but not.
Well, I just think it'd be awesome if you could somehow retrofit an Ericophone and use it as a cell phone. I know that's crazy, but I'm just thinking of being like on the bus or on the subway and your phone rings and you just pull this thing out and everyone's just like, what the F is going on?
Apparently some guy has figured out to like how to modify an Ericophone so that it works with a cell phone. But it's like $600.
Oh, okay. So I'm never going to find out. Well, yeah, as far as the shape goes, I mean, this is a podcast, so we can't show anybody pictures, but, you know, people can Google this. The thing I just read right before I called you on Wikipedia characterized it as a cobra telephone because it kind of looks like a coiled snake.
Yeah, it kind of does, actually. Kind of looks like one of those rattlesnakes.
Mm-hmm. Or like a cobra, like, you know, rearing up to, like, you know, strike or something. Or like Trump on The Apprentice, you know, doing the "you're fired" thing, where he kind of does the little hand motion where it's like a striking cobra. A mutual friend of ours, Fred from the Twilight Zone, whenever this would come up over there, they had a different name for it.
Yes, they did.
They did. They called it the dildophone. And I suppose it kind of resembles some sort of a vibrating object.
I suppose, although it's... I want to say it's about 8 or 9 inches tall.
Yeah.
Maybe 10.
Well, I'm not overly familiar with the vibrating objects, but that doesn't sound like an unreasonable size for one of those. I don't know, and I doubt that the Ericophone has a vibrating feature, which, you know, we're all used to with cell phones. This guy that retrofitted the one for us, I wonder if he put a vibrating feature in his.
Hope not. What I will say is that it has one of those really weird, like, 1950s phone plugs that has 4 prongs. So I can't actually plug it in, but one thing I would love to do, and probably someone on YouTube has done this, and I should probably check, I would love to hear the thing ring.
Yeah, because I don't think in the episode there's kind of a chime that it does, but I don't think that that's the actual ring.
No, I don't
I think that's a sound effect that they lay in, but I think there's probably like a YouTube video of one going off. I should look that up.
Yeah, I haven't bothered. I never actually really thought about hearing it ring. I just thought it was kind of cool factor, because it's on my... listeners, you probably don't know this, but I have what I call a desk of dorkdom, and then I have an overflow desk of dorkdom with like really cool props and replicas and things like this from Twilight Zone and The Outer Limits and Invaders and Twin Peaks and and Lost in Space, and I have the Ericophone right on my overflow desk of Dorkdom, right next to a prop replica of the camera from A Most Unusual Camera.
That's awesome. What color is your Ericophone?
It's like a pinky beige color.
Pinky beige.
It's like kind of like a sand color with pink overtones.
Ooh, okay, all right.
I mean, when I bought it, I didn't buy it for the color. I bought it because it was the cheapest one that was in decent condition and what I was using it for.
Oh, that's how I should too.
Kind of display.
I wanted to mention before we get off here. Last week we covered People Are Alike All Over. You just emailed me something this morning that you just bought online, and what is that?
So the same guy that does the prop replicas of like the Most Unusual Camera, he also does replicas of signs. So like he does signs for Homewood and like the signs for the dummy with the eye chart. But he does one for People Are Alike All Over that is a replica of the sign outside of Markison's cage as this Earth creature in his native habitat. Mm-hmm. And I've been missing out on the auctions because people have kept buying them before I could get a chance to bid. And this time I caught it right on time and I had no competition. So that sign will be coming and gracing my presence this week, and I'm very excited.
And where will that figure into your desk of dorkdom?
Oh dear. That part I haven't figured out. I think it may wind up laying on its side on top of my bookshelf, but I'm not entirely sure. I don't know exactly how big this thing is. So I don't know, like, if it's on a 1-foot stick or, like, whatever. So I don't know anything except that I thought it would be really, really cool.
Oh, no, I agree, and I want one for myself, too. I can think of several places I could put that in my office. So definitely I want that. So that's awesome. That's one of those things where someday I would love to get one of those. But I mean, I would want to use it, and I haven't had a landline for years, so I don't. That would be, it would be a frivolous purchase.
I also wonder if it would even be usable considering like the whole rotary phone thing.
Yeah, I mean, I know that rotary phones still work. I mean, with just a regular phone jack. I know that isn't, but the plug-in, the cord part of it sounds interesting.
I know there's an adapter for it.
Okay.
So you can conceivably get an adapter and plug it into a modern phone jack. But I'm talking about, like, say, for instance, if you wind up calling those really annoying automated systems, and it's like, press 1 for blah, blah, blah. Like,
oh yeah.
Because I am old. I am not that old, but I am old enough to remember the automated systems that say, if you have a touch-tone phone, call this number.
It's funny, and just looking at the Wikipedia page for the Ericophone, they have a big list of media appearances, and these things show up everywhere.
Yeah.
The first example is Third from the Sun, so that may be a first. The first time it was seen on television. The most recent one they list is from the 2015 The Man from U.N.C.L.E. film. Apparently there's one.
Yeah, well, that also was supposed to take place in, like, the 60s, right?
I don't know. I haven't seen it.
I haven't seen the 2015, so I don't know if it is, like, supposed to be kind of, like, retro, sort of. Because if it is, then that would totally make sense.
But what I was much more interested in seeing is apparently Roger Sterling has one in his office on Mad Men. And I do not remember that, but that makes me want to go back and watch Mad Men because I loved Mad Men, and I'm still sad that it's gone.
A good excuse.
Yeah. I mean, I probably don't need an excuse, but... apparently they're in Men in Black, too. Huh. I don't know. I'll have to start keeping my eyes open for that thing. But anyways, okay, well, I'm jealous again of you. You have so much cool stuff that I do not have, and that is really awesome. Listeners, if any of you possess an Ericophone, let me know. I want to see a picture of it. But, Doc, thank you, as always, for your time.
My pleasure.
And I will catch you later.
Bye-bye.
All right, bye.
Yes? Tonight? Well, I'm in bed.
You know, it just drives me crazy when we get one-sided conversations like that. I want to hear the person on the other end. This forces me to fill in the blanks myself.
Yes?
Hello? Hello? Listen, I know you're there. I can hear you breathing.
Well,
Are you the little bugger that's been calling up here all night and then hanging up?
Well, yes?
Yes, it is?
Well, I'm in bed.
And no, you may not.
Well, that was my division head. They're working tonight. They're sending a car over for me.
Then we better get out of here right now.
I'll get our bag. Get ours.
All five pile into the Sturcomobile, which incidentally sounds different from your typical combustion engine type vehicle. It sounds almost like some kind of electric car. I don't know, Chevy Bolt, Volkswagen e-Golf, Nissan Leaf. Anyway, they arrive at the landing field where we see a sign that reads, "Notice, this gate not to be used except in case of emergency." And underneath that, it reads, "Ministry of Science." So wait, maybe this is 1984 after all. So Bill and Jerry get out and gaze through the chain link fence.
That's it. There it is.
We finally see the ship off in the distance like a glowing beacon in the night, which I guess it is. This episode also marks the very first appearance on the Twilight Zone of the C-57D flying saucer from Forbidden Planet. This particular ship would go on to appear many times over the show's 5-year run, pretty much any time they needed a saucer-based spaceship. Now, we've already seen this in several different episodes, but we don't do the series chronologically, so Third from the Sun was the first episode to feature this ship. A flashlight blinks at them from the darkness.
Is that our contact? Yeah, that's him. Eve, flash the lights, just once.
Eve flashes the headlights once. The flashlight blinks again in response, then stays on. All five wait with bated breath. Footsteps crunch against the gravel as their contact approaches. But is it their contact or is it someone else?
Good evening, Sturka. You're a long way from home, aren't you?
Oh, yes, indeedy, you betcha.
And he's packing a gun. He unlocks the gate.
Would you three ladies mind getting out? These two gentlemen and I have an engagement with the authorities.
Jody, who, as it turns out, is great to have around in a crisis, flings the car door open, knocking the gun from Carling's hand. Bill slides across the top of the car and grabs him, while Jerry picks up the gun and cold cocks him with it. What's cool is this is one continuous shot, so Fritz Weaver actually jumps up on top of the car. Now, nowadays, they just get a stunt double and edit around it so the leading man doesn't break a nail or something. Back in '59, men were men. Men, manly men. They get back into the car and head for the ship. Proverbial pedal to the proverbial metal.
Unauthorized vehicle on field. Unauthorized vehicle on field. Guard Unit 7, approach unauthorized vehicle. Approach unauthorized vehicle and request it to halt.
So now we're close to the ship, so we get the full-sized mock-up of the underside, complete with landing gear and retractable stairs. The gang fights off a couple of guards and boards the ship, and we dissolve to... Oh, you thought that was it for the Forbidden Planet eye candy this week? So that right-to-left flyby shot of the ship in space is actually taken directly from the movie itself, cropped to Academy ratio and converted to black and white. But wait, there's more. Inside the ship, big as life, is the giant navigation globe. I'm not sure that's what it's actually called, but it has something to do with navigating the C-57D in Forbidden Planet.
When do we get a DC fix, Jerry? Half a minute, Skipper. Ship on course, sir. We'll reach DC point at 17:01. That's less than 3 minutes now. All right, take it away. Aye, aye, sir.
Wait, there's still more. Behind the Navi globe are three, count 'em, 3 banks of Pac-Man lights. These were, of course, seen in the Krell laboratory on Altair 4 in Forbidden Planet. There they measured psychic power levels, as I recall. Here, well, we aren't told. In fact, for all the times they show up on the Twilight Zone, we never know what it is they actually do. This was the second time they appeared on the Twilight Zone, but because we aren't looking at these episodes chronologically, this is actually the fourth time we've encountered them. We saw them in I Shot an Arrow into the Air, Elegy, and People Are Alike All Over. So they showed up 4 different times in Season 1. After that, they only showed up one more time in the entire series, Season 4's In His Image.
Stars look far away. They are far away. But the one we want, it's not so far, Bill. See it there? It's the shiny one. The bright one over on the right. It's the third planet from the sun, Bill. It's called Earth. That's where we're going. To a place called Earth.
Wait, you mean... No. They're not from... What?
Oh, yes, indeedy, you betcha.
Third from the Sun first aired on January 8, 1960. It started as a short story by Richard Matheson, first published in the October 1950 issue of Galaxy Science Fiction. It's the second of 2 Matheson stories bought for the Twilight Zone and adapted by Rod Serling. The first was Disappearing Act, which was adapted as And When the Sky Was Opened, which we covered a couple months or so back. After these 2, Matheson adapted his own stories going forward. Okay, so the episode title is a dead giveaway. Third from the Sun. Now, the show wouldn't start showing on-screen episode titles until Season 2, but it would still show up in any press materials, right? Did TV Guide print episode titles back then? Well, if nothing else, Serling gave the episode title when he teased the episode the week before. I mean, I guess one might assume that the character's home planet is third from the sun, since you're supposed to think it's Earth, but inquiring minds might wonder, why is this the title to begin with? What does the galactic position of their planet have to do with anything? Maybe I'm overthinking this. I mean, really, it's Richard Matheson who named the original short story, so he chose to kind of give away the surprise from the beginning. And speaking of the short story, I'm happy to report that Tom Elliott did not read it on the Twilight Zone podcast when he covered the episode back in 2011. So, settle in and get comfortable, kids. It's story time. Third from the Sun by Richard Matheson. His eyes were open 5 seconds before the alarm was set to go off. There was no effort in waking. It was sudden. Coldly conscious, he reached out his left hand in the dark and pushed in the stop. The alarm glowed a second, then faded. At his side, his wife put her hand on his arm. "Did you sleep?" he asked. "No. Did you?" "A little," he said. "Not much." She was silent for a few seconds. He heard her throat contract. She shivered. He knew what she was going to say. "We're still going?" she said. He twisted his shoulders on the bed and took a deep breath. "Yes," he said, and he felt her fingers tighten on his arm. "What time is it?" she asked. "About 5. "We'd better get ready." "Yes, we'd better." They made no move. "You're sure we can get on the ship without anyone noticing?" she asked. "They think it's just another test flight. Nobody will be checking." She didn't say anything. She moved a little closer to him. He felt how cold her skin was. "I'm afraid," she said. He took her hand and held it in a tight grip. "Don't be," he said. "We'll be safe." "It's the children I'm worried about." "We'll be safe," he repeated. She shifted his hand to her lips and kissed it gently. "All right," she said. They both sat up in the darkness. He heard her stand. Her night garment rustled to the floor. She didn't pick it up. She stood still, shivering in the cold morning air. "You're sure we don't need anything else with us?" she asked. "No, nothing. I have all the supplies we need in the ship. Anyway." "What?" "We can't carry anything past the guard," he said. "He has to think you and the kids are just coming to see me off." She began dressing. He threw off the covering and got up. He went across the cold floor to the closet and dressed. "I'll get the children up," she said. He grunted, pulling clothes over his head. At the door, she stopped. "Are you sure?" she began. "What?" "Won't the guard think it's funny that our neighbors are coming down to see you off too?" He sank down on the bed and fumbled for the clasps on his shoes. "We'll have to take that chance," he said. "We need them with us." She sighed. It seemed so cold, so calculating. He straightened up and saw her silhouette in the doorway. "What else can we do?" he asked intensely. "We can't interbreed our own children." "No," she said. "It's just what?" "Nothing, darling. I'm sorry." She closed the door. Her footsteps disappeared down the hall. The door to the children's room opened. He heard their two voices. A cheerless smile raised his lips. You'd think it was a holiday, he thought. He pulled on his shoes. At least the kids didn't know what was happening. They thought they were going to take him down to the field. They thought they'd come back and tell all their schoolmates about it. They didn't know they'd never come back. He finished clasping his shoes and stood up. He shuffled over to the bureau and turned on the light. It was odd, such an undistinguished-looking man planning this. Cold, calculating. Her words filled his mind again. Well, there was no other way. In a few years, probably less, the whole planet would go up with a blinding flash. This was the only way out. Escaping, starting all over again with a few people on a new planet. He stared at the reflection. There's no other way, he said. He glanced around the bedroom. Goodbye, this part of my life. Turning off the lamp was like turning off a light in his mind. He closed the door gently behind him and slid his fingers off the worn handle. His son and daughter were going down the ramp. They were talking in mysterious whispers. He shook his head in slight amusement. His wife was waiting for him. They went down together, holding hands. I'm not afraid, darling, she said. It'll be all right. Sure, he said. Sure it will. They all went in to eat. He sat down with his children. His wife poured out juice for them. Then she went to get the food. Help your mother, doll, he told his daughter. She got up. Pretty soon, huh, Pop? His son said. Pretty soon, huh? Take it easy, he cautioned. Remember what I told you. If you say a word of it to anybody, I'll have to leave you behind. A dish shattered on the floor. He darted a glance at his wife. She was staring at him, her lips trembling. She averted her eyes and bent down. She fumbled at the pieces, picked up a few. Then she dropped them all, stood up, and pushed them against the wall with her shoe. As if it mattered, she said nervously. As if it mattered whether the place is clean or not. The children were watching her in surprise. What is it? Asked the daughter. Nothing, darling, nothing, she said. I'm just nervous. Go back to the table, drink your juice. We have to eat quickly. The neighbors will be here soon. Pop, why are the neighbors coming with us? Asked his son. Because, he said vaguely, they want to. Now forget it. Don't talk about it so much. The room was quiet. His wife brought their food and set it down. Only her footsteps broke the silence. The children kept glancing at each other, at their father. He kept his eyes on the plate. The food tasted flat and thick in his mouth, and he felt his heart thudding against the wall of his chest. Last day. This is the last day. You'd better eat, he told his wife. She sat down to eat. As she lifted the eating utensil, the door buzzer sounded. The utensil skidded out of her nerveless fingers and clattered on the floor. He reached out quickly and put his hand on hers. All right, darling, he said. It's all right. He turned to the children. Go answer the door, he told them. Both of us? His daughter asked. Both of you. But do as I say. They slid off their chairs and left the room, glancing back at their parents. When the sliding door shut off their view, he turned back to his wife. Her face was pale and tight. She had her lips pressed together. Darling, please, he said. Please, you know I wouldn't take you if I wasn't sure it was safe. You know how many times I've flown this ship before, and I know just where we're going. It's safe. Believe me, it's safe. She pressed his hand against her cheek. She closed her eyes, and large tears ran out under her lids and down her cheeks. It's not that so much, she said. It's just leaving, never coming back. We've been here all our lives. It isn't like moving. We can't come back, ever. Listen, darling. His voice was tense and hurried. You know as well as I do, in a matter of years, maybe less, there's going to be another war, a terrible one. There won't be a thing left. We have to leave, for our children, for ourselves. He paused, testing the words in his mind. For the future of life itself, he finished weakly. He was sorry he said it. Early in the morning, over prosaic food, that kind of talk didn't sound right, even if it was true. Just don't be afraid, he said. We'll be all right. She squeezed his hand. I know, she said quietly. I know. There were footsteps coming toward them. He pulled out a tissue and gave it to her. She hastily dabbed at her face. The door slid open. The neighbors and their son and daughter came in. The children were excited. They had trouble keeping it down. Good morning, the neighbor said. The neighbor's wife went to his wife, and the two of them went over to the window and talked in low voices. The children stood around, fidgeted, and looked nervously at each other. You've eaten? He asked his neighbor. Yes, his neighbor said. Don't you think we'd better be going? I suppose so, he said. They left all the dishes on the table. His wife went upstairs and got garments for the family. He and his wife stayed on the porch a moment while the rest went out to the ground car. Should we lock the door? He asked. She smiled helplessly and ran a hand through her hair. She shrugged. Does it matter? She said, and turned away. He locked the door and followed her down the walk. She turned as he came up to her. It's a nice house, she murmured. Don't think about it, he said. They turned their backs on their home and got in the ground car. Did you lock it? Asked the neighbor. Yes. The neighbor smiled wryly. So did we, he said. I tried not to, but then I had to go back. They moved through the quiet streets. The edges of the sky were beginning to redden. The neighbor's wife and the 4 children were in back. His wife and the neighbor were in front with him. Going to be a nice day, said the neighbor. I suppose so, he said. Have you told your children? The neighbor asked softly. Of course not. I haven't, insisted his neighbor. I was just asking. Oh. They rode in silence a while. Do you ever get the feeling that we're running out? Asked the neighbor. He tightened. No, he said. His lips pressed together. No. I guess it's better not to talk about it, his neighbor said hastily. Much better, he said. As they drove up to the guardhouse at the gate, he turned to the back. Remember, he said, not a word from any of you. The guard was sleepy and didn't care. The guard recognized him right away as the chief test pilot for the new ship. That was enough. The family was coming down to watch him off, he told the guard. That was all right. The guard let them drive to the ship's platform. The car stopped under the huge columns. They all got out and stared up. Far above them, its nose pointed toward the sky, the great metal ship was beginning to reflect the early morning glow. Let's go, he said, quickly. As they hurried toward the ship's elevator, he stopped for a moment to look back. The guardhouse looked deserted. He looked around at everything and tried to fix it all in his memory. He bent over and picked up some dirt. He put it in his pocket. Goodbye, he whispered. He ran to the elevator. The doors shut in front of them. There was no sound in the rising cubicle but the hum of the motor and a few self-conscious coughs from the children. He looked at them. To be taken so young, he thought, without a chance to help. He closed his eyes. His wife's arm rested on his arm. He looked at her. Their eyes met, and she smiled at him. It's all right, she whispered. The elevator shuddered to a stop. The door slid open, and they went out. It was getting lighter. He hurried them along the enclosed platform. They all climbed through the narrow doorway in the ship's side. He hesitated before following them. He wanted to say something fitting the moment. It burned in him to say something fitting the moment. He couldn't. He swung in and grunted as he pulled the door shut and turned the wheel tight. "That's it," he said. "Come on, everybody." Their footsteps echoed on the metal decks and ladders as they went up to the control room. The children ran to the ports and looked out. They gasped when they saw how high they were. Their mother stood behind them, looking down at the ground with frightened eyes. He went up to them. "So high," said the daughter. He patted her head gently. "So high," she repeated. Then he turned abruptly and went over to the instrument panel. He stood there hesitantly. He heard someone come up behind him. "Shouldn't we tell the children?" asked his wife. "Shouldn't we let them know it's their last look?" "Go ahead," he said. "Tell them." He waited to hear her footsteps. There were none. He turned. She kissed him on the cheek. Then she went to tell the children. He threw over the switch. Deep in the belly of the ship, a spark ignited the fuel. A concentrated rush of gas flooded from the vents. The bulkheads began to shake. He heard his daughter crying. He tried not to listen. He extended a trembling hand toward the lever, then glanced back suddenly. They were all staring at him. He put his hand on the lever and threw it over. The ship quivered a brief second, and then they felt it rush along the smooth incline. It flashed up into the air, faster and faster. They all heard the wind rushing past. He watched the children turn to the ports and look out again. "Goodbye," they said. "Goodbye." He sank down wearily at the control panel. Out of the corner of his eyes, he saw his neighbor sit down next to him. "You know just where we're going?" his neighbor asked. "On that chart there." His neighbor looked at the chart, his eyebrows raised. "In another solar system," he said. "That's right. It has an atmosphere like ours. We'll be safe there." "The race will be safe," said his neighbor. He nodded once and looked back at his and his neighbor's families. They were still looking out the ports. "What?" he asked. "I said," the neighbor repeated, "which one of these planets is it?" He leaned over the chart, pointed. "That small one over there," he said, "near that moon. This one? Third from the sun?" "That's right," he said. "That one. Third from the sun." I waited until after the episode synopsis to read the story to preserve the surprise ending. And our focus is the episode, not the original story. I guess anybody listening to this already knows the ending either way, so... Third from the Sun is the first of 7 episodes directed by Jeannie Evans' husband at the time, Richard L. Baer. He'll go on to direct The Purple Testament, Nick of Time, The Prime Mover, To Serve Man, The Fugitive, and What's in the Box. That's a really diverse set of episodes, including a couple of really iconic ones. It's too bad that he's probably best remembered for directing 166 episodes of Green Acres. There were 170 episodes total, so he directed 97.65% of them. It'd be nice if he was remembered for something a bit more, I don't know, substantial. I don't mean quantity, I mean quality. I mean, I'm not knocking Green Acres, but damn. His work here is exemplary. He uses, well heck, let's just let him tell us.
I had decided to give it a different cinematic look.
Yes.
I decided that I would shoot all my long shots with a bug-eye lens, the widest lens that you could get. And when I moved in for a close-up, I would use a 25mm lens for close-ups. If you were the camera and I was shooting a picture of you now and you had a wide-angle lens on, I'd look fairly reasonable like this. But if I put my finger out and shook at you, it would be a finger this foot high, you see.
I understand.
See, in front of the thing. And you can get some weird effects. I wanted to give the feeling that they weren't let's see how I can explain this. That we were on Earth, but the audience shouldn't know we were on. No, wait a minute.
It was the other way around.
Yeah, we're not on Earth. We're not on Earth. But people drive automobiles, and they have homes, and human beings, and all of that. But I wanted to give them just a little bit different look, because the end of the picture, they were trying to escape the Holocaust.
Right.
So they captured a rocket, and they went up into the air. Well, now, once they're on course, our leading man goes to the pilot, and he says, now, what is the name of this planet that we're going to go to? And he says, it's third from the sun. It's a place called Earth.
Yeah. I noticed another thing about that, which is almost all of the angles are tilted. They're a very strange
Yeah,
angles.
well, you saw the film.
Yes, I've seen it many times.
Yeah.
And was that deliberate too as well?
Yes,
to give it that
I'd forgotten that. That's right. I remember. Yeah.
Almost all of the shot angles are really weirdly tilted up, lots of up angles.
That's right.
And as well, there's one very strange shot when they're driving, and it's a shot from under the wheel of the car, so you see the tires spinning. Did you remember that shot?
Yeah, right.
How did you rig that up? Do you recall?
Well, it was. I had another one too there. They were playing cards, and we had the camera on the floor with a glass table, and you could see all the faces all playing cards and doing that. Another thing I did in that, I think in that same sequence, I put the camera in the center of the table, and I started on you, and you bid, and then went over here, and then you did your bid, and then I went over here and I raised, and I went around there, and I went back to you. See, so we had to build the set in and make a four-sided. I did all kinds of tricks in that show.
The tricks, as Bear calls them, contribute hugely to the episode's success. We assume we're on Earth, and even though there are odd little details here and there, we never think we're anywhere else. But yeah, something is slightly off. All those tilted angles, the weird, unconventional perspectives, you can write it off as reflective of the tension of the story, since all these characters are wound up so tight. But at the end, when we discover that we weren't on Earth at all, it all makes a perfect sort of retroactive sense. Bear makes some really remarkable choices. He was clearly a very talented director. So it's highly unfortunate that the bulk of his legacy involves Barnaby Jones and a Gabor sister living on a farm for yucks and shucks. I mean, I'm not knocking Green Acres. Okay, maybe I am. Just a bit. So looking beyond the end credits, these lucky folks have escaped a planet on the verge of Armageddon. But won't they find the same problems when they get to Earth?
Now, this place we're going to.
It's populated, Bill. It has people on it. We've picked up radio waves, even some snatches of a language not dissimilar to ours.
Okay, so the Earth they're escaping to is presumably present-day Earth, mid-20th century, or later, when all-out nuclear war was a very real possibility. So it's kinda hard to accept their success as a happy ending, though I'm not sure Serling meant it to be downbeat. Our heroes have actually leapt from the proverbial frying pan into the proverbial fire. If you subscribe to the idea that these people are total dicks for stealing the ship and fleeing a Holocaust, one that Bill Sturka may have had a hand in causing, by the way, given his profession, then there's a sideways kind of cosmic justice in all this that you might find appropriate and or satisfying. They may have only delayed their demise.
No, I'm just a cog in the wheel, Jody. I mean, look at it this way. In one bomb, there are perhaps 1,000 pieces, and every piece requires a team of 50, 60, 70 people. Looking at it like that, I'm not quite as responsible.
In Matheson's original story, Earth is virginal and uninhabited, so our intrepid voyagers are presumably Adam and Eve and friends. This is, of course, a dusty, cringe-worthy cliché nowadays, but the concept was probably at least sort of fresh in 1950 when the story was published. So which is better? That Bill and company escape one technologically advanced society for another and will face very similar problems, or that they're ancient astronauts who become the first humans on Earth? I kind of go back and forth, but more often than not, I find myself preferring the dark pessimism, intentional or not, of Serling's adaptation. It's interesting to note that Serling chose to name Bill Sturka's wife Eve, despite eschewing Matheson's Adam and Eve angle. Meanwhile, Matheson didn't name any of the characters in the story. But this is all probably moot anyway.
You mad, bro?
Don't make me angry. You wouldn't like me when I'm angry.
There's never any mention of the ship possessing interstellar warp drive or suspended animation chambers, and I'm betting it has neither because there's apparently some question whether it can even leave the atmosphere. So these folks will be dead long before they ever reach their destination. Serling places their target destination at 11 million miles away, which is an error worthy of a kick in the asteroid. The nearest planet to Earth, Venus, is around 24 million miles away. But since none of the other planets in our solar system can sustain human life, our heroes must come from even further away. Even if we generously put their world out just beyond Pluto, a flight to Earth would take over 30 years. And I'm using the space shuttle's maximum speed of 17,500 miles per hour. Since the ship's ability to travel to another world is apparently somewhat novel and untested, this seems fair. And there's no way there's 30 years worth of food in that little saucer. And this society seems to mirror mid-20th century Earth with regards to food technology. They're still eating cake and drinking lemonade, so I can't imagine they have meals in pill form. There's also nothing indicating that this society has anything approximating suspended animation, plus the saucer's never even been tested in deep space, so there's no reason to think that suspension animation equipment would be built into it. Yeah, I know. I need to embrace a different kind of suspension, the suspension of disbelief. And I do. Honestly, none of the wonky science detracts from my enjoyment of the episode. Not one bit. But you cannot deny that 11 million miles thing is just dumb. Come on, Rod.
You're a little nervous, Mrs. Sturka. You're very nervous.
Here's a thought. So we can assume that Carling's known all along what Sturka and friends are up to. So he's basically indulging in a game of cat and mouse until he can catch them in the act. It seems really indulgent, especially since the world is basically going to end within 48 hours. Talk about pointless. He has nothing better to do. I mean, he probably doesn't have a family or anything, but you'd think he could find a better way to spend his last day or two of existence. Even if he had successfully apprehended Sturka and company, what would it matter? They'd be locked up for the last 48 hours of their lives? I mean, yeah, he probably is that petty, but unless... Okay, here's something. The only reason we have the 48 hours timeline is because Carling told Sturka that, then mentions it later when he intrudes on the card game. Maybe Doomsday isn't actually that close at all, and he's only saying it in order to force their hand. The underscore for Third from the Sun is comprised of stock cues from the CBS Music Library, predominantly selections from Bernard Herrmann's Outer Space Suite, plus a pretty recognizable piece by Marius Constant called Light Rain, which you're hearing right now. Overall, it's a very similar collection of cues to the one that we heard in People Are Alike All Over, which we just covered last time. But Third from the Sun came first by about 3 months. The real musical star here is the cue Time Passage from Herrmann's Outer Space Suite, which runs for a whopping 3 minutes and 40 seconds during Carling's visit to the Sturka household. The Outer Space Suite has been released twice, once on vinyl in the 80s and on CD in 1999, but Time Passage was conspicuously omitted both times, which is weird because it's probably the most recognizable section of the whole suite. When the Twilight Zone Season 1 Definitive Edition DVD came out in 2005, the music from Third from the Sun was isolated on a separate music track, and voila! Time Passage was finally available. It's also on the more recent Season 1 Blu-ray set, which I'm assuming everyone listening owns, right? Fast forward to... when exactly? You know, for the first time since this podcast started, I had a tough time choosing a second episode to cover. So far the pairings have been pretty obvious, but this time I found two different episodes that would have complemented Third from the Sun nicely, and I was really torn between them. Either of them would have totally worked, but for very different reasons. I considered Probe 7 Over and Out from Season 5, which concerns an astronaut escaping a planet on the brink of destruction and starting over again on a new world. And this one actually turns out to be Earth 2, but an ancient Earth in which humans haven't yet appeared. So I guess it's more like Richard Matheson's original Third from the Sun than the Twilight Zone episode. But Probe 7 has even more in common thematically with the Season 3 Episode 2, so I ultimately decided that I would cover those two together, assuming I get that far. Right now, I'm just trying to get through Season 1 before I commit to going any further. Which leaves us with my other choice. The Invaders, written by Richard Matheson, but not based on an existing short story, first aired on January 27th, 1961, a little over a year after Third from the Sun debuted. We open on a long shot of a farmhouse, smoke billowing from its chimney. We see the hollowed-out ruin of what appears to be a barn, and a crude wooden fence surrounding the property. The landscape is mostly barren, with what looks like sagebrush here and there. Serling describes it as follows.
This is one of the out-of-the-way places. The unvisited places. Bleak, wasted, dying. This is a farmhouse. Handmade, crude. A house without electricity or gas. A house untouched by progress.
We cut to a much closer shot, right outside a glassless window. A decidedly unglamorous woman is inside, cutting vegetables for a stew. Serling walks into the frame and continues.
This is the woman who lives in the house. A woman who's been alone for many years. A strong, simple woman whose only problem up until this moment has been that of acquiring enough food to eat. A woman about to face terror, which is, even now, coming at her from the Twilight Zone.
Gotta love that. Serling didn't start appearing on camera until the second season, but once he started, they found all sorts of inventive ways of integrating him into the scene. More often than not, however, he wasn't seen with the actors. They'd usually whip pan over to him standing nearby. But here, he's right outside this woman's window, insert peeping Tom joke here, and even after he's no longer in the shot, we still see his cigarette smoke lingering in the air. The woman is of course oblivious to his presence, but wouldn't it be hilarious if she wrinkled her nose when she smelled the smoke, or maybe saw him and shut the curtains? So this is a heavily rustic scene. Candles flicker here and there, almost everything is made of wood, even the woman's clothing looks like some kind of burlap. There's a bit of metal here and there, a set of knives hangs on the wall, and her giant cauldron is likely cast iron, all very primitive. I'm guessing, I don't know, several centuries ago? There's a cute moment where she chews on a slice of potato while she stirs her stew, or whatever she's making. The roiling steam makes it look like a witch's cauldron. I mean, she's not a witch. Or maybe she is. I mean, it's early. We don't know who or what she is at this point. But oh, we absolutely know who the actress is playing her. It's the legendary star of radio, stage, and screen, big and small, Agnes Moorehead, who's mostly remembered as Samantha's mother Endora on Bewitched, but has a number of impressive credits to her name. She got her start in radio, where she appeared in more episodes of Suspense than any other actor or actress, including a very famous one in 1943 called Sorry, Wrong Number.
Your call, please.
Operator, I'm in desperate trouble.
I'm sorry, I cannot hear you. Please speak louder.
I don't dare. There's someone listening. Can you hear me now?
I'm sorry.
Oh, but you've got to hear me. Oh, please, you've got to help me. There's someone in this house. Someone who's going to murder me. And you've got to get in touch with... Oh, there it is. There it is. Did you hear it? He's put it down. He's put down the extension phone. He's coming up. He's coming upstairs. Okay, give me the police department. The police department. Give me the police department.
One moment, please. I will connect you.
I can hear him. Oh, I can hear him. He's coming nearer. Oh, I know it. Hurry, please.
Incidentally, Sorry, Wrong Number was written by Lucille Fletcher, who also wrote the suspense episode The Hitchhiker, which would go on to become a very famous Twilight Zone episode. Sorry, Wrong Number, meanwhile, became a very successful film, but Moorhead didn't star in it. That honor went to Barbara Stanwyck. Kind of like what happened with The Hitchhiker. Orson Welles starred in the radio version, but the TV part went to Inger Stevens. Serling changed the gender, so it really wasn't a slight against Welles. But with Sorry, Wrong Number, well, I imagine Barbara Stanwyck was a much bigger name, so... But Moorhead reprised the role many times over the next few decades, even after the Barbara Stanwyck film, so she remained closely identified with the part, until she became Endora in 1964, and then she'd always be Endora.
I told you, Samantha, that you wouldn't like being part of the animal world. They're not animals, Mother, they're human beings. Yes, of course. Granted, the most intelligent of animals. And as Diogenes said, also the silliest. Or was it Diogenes? Oh, well, it was one of those young, good-looking Greeks who talked an awful lot.
But before that, she had a very memorable small role as Orson Welles' mother in Citizen Kane. She also appeared in its follow-up, The Magnificent Ambersons. She did a few film noirs, most notably 1947's Dark Passage with Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall.
She wants you very badly, doesn't she? She's willing to run away with you and keep on running and ruin everything for herself. But she wouldn't care because she'd be with you, and that's what she wants. Well, she doesn't have you now, and she'll never have you, and nobody'll ever have you, and that's the way I want it. You're nothing but an escaped convict. Nobody knows what you wrote down. They'll believe me. They'll believe me.
In 1964, the same year Bewitched premiered, she earned a Best Supporting Actress nomination for her work in Hush, Hush, Sweet Charlotte.
Oh, so you're finally showing the right side of your face, ain't you? Well, I've seen it all the time. That's some kind of drug that you've been giving her. You've been making her act the way she's been. Well, I'm going into town, and I'm going to tell them what you've been up to.
The Invaders is her only Twilight Zone, but she did cross paths with Rod Serling twice for Night Gallery. She appeared in the segments Certain Shadows on the Wall and Witch's Feast, where she played the head witch.
Here is the foam of a mad dog's lips, gathered beneath the moon's eclipse. Ashes of a shroud consumed in a deadly vapor fume. These, within the mess I cast, stir the cauldron, stir it fast.
Which brings us back to where we left off. She looks a bit witchy here as she's stirring that big cauldron. And then we hear a sound that completely clashes with this rustic scene. The woman seems very disturbed by the sound. She's clearly never heard anything like this before. So whatever it is, seems to have landed on her roof. She climbs a ladder up to a hatch, which leads to the roof, because who doesn't have roof access built into their kitchen? Candle in hand, she ventures out onto the roof. Parked on her roof is something she's clearly never seen before, but we've seen it lots of times. It's the C-57D space cruiser from Forbidden Planet, only here it's much smaller. Agnes would never fit inside this thing. To her it's probably, I don't know, maybe the size of a hula hoop, or maybe the top of one of those small bistro tables. We're back in time, right? So she probably has no idea what a hula hoop or a bistro table is. She's probably never seen anything this perfectly round and smooth and metallic. She slowly approaches it and stretches out her leg to tap it with her foot. Some kind of electrical force field gives her a bit of a jolt. She crouches down behind it. This is a really great shot here. The ship sits still in the foreground while she crawls around behind it, tentatively moving closer to it, a great juxtaposition of simplistic earthiness against sleek future technology. She leans in close to listen to it, her eyes darting to and fro. She's almost animal-like. She crouches down to see the underside of the ship, just in time to see the retractable stairway slowly open, which spooks her. She crawls back toward the hatch while we see a shadow appear at the top of the tiny stairs. We hear tiny footsteps, and then it looks like a tiny wind-up robot. A chubby, tiny wind-up robot. Silver, metallic, maybe 10 inches high with a spinning radar dish on top of its head. And, it's kind of adorable. There's no way around it. This little guy is cute as hell. I'm a little surprised it isn't a tiny goddamned Robbie the Robot, but I guess these robots maybe needed to be a bit more mobile. I guess we'll find out together. Agnes doesn't think it's cute at all. She swings her foot around and kicks it down the hatch into her kitchen. She slams the trapdoor shut and lays across it to keep it inside. And then more footsteps. There's another one. We'll call this one Thing 2, and this one is firing a laser weapon at her. Agnes backs away, clutching at her shoulder in pain. She grabs her candle and tosses it, knocking the little guy out of sight and thankfully not setting her house on fire. She opens the trapdoor and climbs back down into the kitchen. We hear the tiny footsteps of Thing 2 on the roof above. She then looks around the room, realizing that Thing 1 is somewhere inside. She finds what looks like a single bulb from a string of Christmas lights lying on the floor. She picks it up and accidentally activates it. It's Thing 1's laser pistol. She then notices several blisters on her hand. She checks her shoulder where she was hit earlier and sees more blisters there. She goes to a pan of water and splashes it onto her hand, then wets a towel and dabs at her shoulder. It's almost like watching an injured animal lick its wounds. She then grabs a candle and starts checking all the rooms. This is a really nicely choreographed sequence here. The lighting changes with her as she moves throughout the house, mimicking the glow of the candle. She reaches what we would consider the living room. There's what appears to be a couch in one corner with a brick fireplace across the room and various pieces of pottery throughout. Everything simple, basic, not reflective of a specific time or locale. She stalks her prey with a large wooden spoon, eagerly seeking out the tiny invader. Basically, me whenever there's a fly in the house. She opens a closet door, to find Thing 1 standing there. Thing 1 fires its laser at her. She slams the door in its tiny face. She hears more footsteps, but they're not coming from the closet. They're somewhere in the room behind her. She panics and knocks over her candle, which is snuffed out before anything catches fire. Man, this chick is lucky. She scrambles back to the kitchen. We saw a trio of knives hanging on the wall earlier, but now there are only 2 knives. A strange noise emits from a cupboard, and suddenly Thing 2 is standing there. It's not clear what just happened, but I think it cut its way through the wall from the other side and into the cupboard. I don't mean with the missing knife. Presumably he blasted his way through with his Christmas bulb laser pistol. But wouldn't he have to fly to get up there? So do these mini robot guys have jetpacks? Anyway, so Agnes shuts him inside the cupboard, then gropes her way across the dark room. And then we see a glint of metal down by her feet. Actually, 2 glints of metal. Thing 1, who has apparently liberated itself from the closet, and that missing knife. Uh-oh. She falls back onto the couch in pain. And yep, the invaders do have jetpacks because Thing 1 flies up onto her stomach. She throws it across the room and retreats to a corner where she grabs an axe. We hear that radar telemetry sound again, which she follows to a door. There's no doorknob, but there is a little pull handle thing and a moon pie-sized hole next to it. She reaches for the handle, at which point the knife pokes through the hole and slices her hand. Now she's pissed. She bursts into the room, axe raised, ready for battle. This must be her bedroom, since there's a crude bed and what looks like a nightstand next to it. I'm not sure a culture this primitive would have nightstands. I mean, there's no lamp, no alarm clock, framed photographs, or anything else to put on it. The bedroom appears to be empty. She looks around and finally spies Thing 2 under the blanket on her bed. She quickly wads the little guy up in the blanket. The knife pokes through the fabric, which she wrestles from its tiny grip. Thing 1 fires at her from across the room, but she proceeds quite undeterred. She slams the swaddled little bundle of metallic joy against a nearby table repeatedly until it stops moving. She then drops it into a wooden box, which she stuffs into the fireplace. Rest in peace, Thing 1. I mean, you've behaved extremely dickishly, plus, man, you poked the bear, like, hard. You asked for it. I'd play the usual dick clip, but you're a robot, so whoever programmed you is probably the real dick. Thing 2 blasts its way through the wall, takes a couple more shots at Agnes, then makes a beeline for the ship on the roof. Agnes scales the ladder, axe in hand. She arrives just in time to see the stairway retract back up into the ship. And then she commences hacking the ever-loving shit out of the ship. And then a voice emanates from inside it, the only dialogue in the entire episode, except for Agnes's various grunts and shrieks.
Central Control! Come in, Central Control! Do you read me? Gresham is dead. Repeat, Gresham is dead. The ship's destroyed. Incredible race of giants here. Race of giants. No Central Control. No counterattack. Repeat, no counterattack. Too much for us. Too powerful. Stay away. Gresham and I, we're finished. Finished. Stay away.
Agnes hacks at the ship even more, cutting off the transmission and killing Thing 2 in the process. She drops the axe and slumps wearily against the side of the house, exhausted and presumably deeply traumatized. We then see an overhead view of the ship, chopped up to hell. The camera does a slow pan across it until we see something painted on the hull. U.S. Air Force Space Probe Number 1. Wait, you mean... No. They weren't They were... Come on. And this is... You mean we're not on... What? The Invaders is a tricky episode to discuss or analyze, mostly because it's so simple. Battle of wits and wills between a lone victim and the tiny a-holes that menace her. There's no message, no moral, no freaking dialogue. It's all mood, atmosphere, and bursts of violence. And of course that shock ending, which is essentially the same shock ending as Third from the Sun. This isn't Earth. Earth is the other place, the unseen place, the place Sturka and friends are fleeing to, and the place these little invaders hail from. And interestingly, the Earthlings are total assholes. They land on this poor innocent woman's house and immediately start shooting at her. What's their mission exactly? Now, we aren't that far in the future here. It's still called the Air Force, and it's still the U.S. Air Force. So they don't hail from some future utopia where Earth is united in peace. Still the US, still the Air Force. Why are we visiting other planets and harassing the citizenry? This is Space Probe Number 1, so they're pretty fucking aggressive for their first time out. Americans, man.
I'm afraid of Americans. I'm afraid of the world. I'm afraid I can't help it. I'm afraid I can't. I'm afraid of Americans. I'm afraid of the world. I'm afraid I can't help it. I'm afraid I can't. I'm afraid of Americans.
David Bowie, rest in peace. Hey, I just realized that song is from an album called Earthling. I'm afraid of Americans, Earthling. Maybe Bowie was a TZ fan. Hey, Trent Reznor of Nine Inch Nails remixed that track, and he's in the music video, and we know he's a fan. Now, I haven't historically been a big fan of this episode. I wouldn't say I've hated it the way I used to hate Time Enough at Last, or the way I still hate Mr. Beavis, but the Invaders never did much for me. I mean, I've always respected it on a technical level, and Agnes Moorehead is phenomenal as the unnamed woman. My main gripe is the same gripe Matheson himself had. It moves way too slow. In the Twilight Zone Companion, Mark Zickery shares the following Matheson quote. I never liked it. I don't like it today. For one thing, I think it's incredibly slow moving. My script had twice as much incident as they used in the final version. It moved like a shot. The teaser alone of the woman cutting vegetables and then hearing the noise, it seems like it takes her forever to get up to the roof. I read the teleplay, and there are definitely differences. First, Matheson actually does have Agnes accidentally start a fire right before the end of Act 1 by losing control of her candle on her straw-filled bed. I mean, she stamps it out right after the commercial break, but it would have made for a more exciting act break, right? I mean, fire is always exciting. Now, Agnes still traps one of the invaders in a wadded up blanket, but here it escapes before she can bash it repeatedly against the table. She still traps him inside the wooden box, however, but here she does it by tricking him into jumping into it. So this Agnes is a bit craftier. From there, she burns the box, same as in the finished episode. The biggest difference of all isn't found in the sequence of events or the specifics of the battle. It's one single shot. As the camera pans around the rim of the ruined spacecraft after Agnes has demolished it with her axe, the printing on the ship doesn't read U.S. Air Force Space Probe Number 1. Matheson's script has it say U.S. Air Force Mars 1. So Matheson intended this planet to be Mars. The original Serling closing narration is different too. This is one of the out-of-the-way places. Until now, one of the unvisited places in our solar system. The planet Mars. Bleak, wasted, dying. But not quite dead yet. I like that. It reprises part of his opening narration. I do like the ambiguity of the identity of the alien planet in the episode, but I think I like the Mars revelation more. This Mars is bleak, wasted, dying, before it ever developed any kind of meaningful technology. It got about as far as Little House on the Prairie and then screeched to a grinding halt. But Matheson's assertion that he had twice as much going on, I don't know. Outside of the fire, it's pretty much the same sequence of events. Maybe a couple of the scenes are more elaborate, and I think Agnes gets shot a few more times, but it's mostly the same. I think, having now read the original teleplay, Matheson was too hard on the finished episode. You know who liked it a lot better? Rod Serling.
I thought the two best shows we did, one I wrote, one I didn't write. One was an original by Dick Matheson called The Invaders, with Agnes Moorehead, which was in a sense pure science fiction with a very O. Henry-ish twist.
Unfortunately, the unfolding of the plot wasn't the only thing Matheson didn't like. Also, I thought those little roly-poly dolls were ridiculous looking. The way I had written it, you would only catch very quick views of them and never anything clear. To see these little things waddling across the floor was about as frightening as Peter Rabbit coming at you. Hey, wait a minute now. I'm going to have to disagree with you there, Mr. Matheson. Wait, what did Serling think of the little guys?
Poor Dick Matheson, on the other hand, suffered what is really one of the clinical problems of doing science fiction on TV. This desperately required 8-inch little men to walk across the floor of a room. And suddenly we are made aware of the fact that this woman who we thought was normal is actually an extraterrestrial giant. And the two men who are the invaders are actually really young American astronauts. So all we could use, because we couldn't afford opticals and we couldn't afford montage effects, were little wind-up rubber men. And they walked precisely like little wind-up rubber men. And I thought it totally destroyed the illusion and pointed out to me, the desperate built-in problems to doing proper science fiction on television.
Damn it. Well, I'm going to disagree with both of them. I friggin' love The Invader. I love the design. There's nothing else in sci-fi quite like it. I love that it totally looks like a robot, but in retrospect, you totally buy that there's a human in there. I personally don't think it looks silly or ridiculous at all. That's funny. I was making fun of the astronauts' spacesuits from Elegy last time, with all the puffy ribbing and the vintage undersea wear look. The Invader suit has very similar ribbing on its arms and legs, and it's 10 times puffier overall. In fact, they appear to actually be inflated, which is a novel way to hold more oxygen, I guess. But I don't mind it here at all. Maybe because the tone of the episode is so different. It's so dark and bleak, while Elegy was a tonally weird piece with bits of humor running throughout. I don't know. But it is true, Matheson's script makes a point of keeping the invaders in the shadows and only employing very quick shots of them in action. So that part I definitely agree with him on. The invaders are easy to see in the finished episode. Close up, plain as day. There's no mystery to them. Serling called the invaders wind-up rubber men, which they certainly look like, but wind-up mechanisms did not power them. In an interview with Mark Zickery in the late 70s, director Douglas Hayes explains all things Invader.
Now these little guys... I used to be an art director. It was one of the reasons they used to like to get me in on these things. And I designed this little character.
Really?
Yeah. I made a drawing, which was then, these characters were then made by oddly enough, by the makeup department.
Really?
Yeah, they modeled these things, and from my drawing, which was sort of based on that Michelin tire man. And the reason that I made them this kind of bulky, round shape is that, first of all, they should not look like human beings. But secondly, after the fact, you had to say they were human beings. Aha, then therefore they were in an inflated spacesuit, right? So here they couldn't look too human. But they later had to. Later had to say they were human. So in both cases, so you had that double thing again. You know. Now, I actually worked these characters as puppets on my hands. I made a cut down here like this, and I would insert my hands, and if I was going to walk them, I would put my fingers down into the legs.
Nice.
They were hollow. They were hollow and made of soft rubber.
Oh my.
And they were painted gold, this part here. And I would walk my fingers like you walk your fingers for a child, you know. And they would walk forward. And I had, for example, if they were walking in through the windowsill or something of that house, I had a black night outside. I'd have a black sleeve on, and they'd actually walk in through the window. My sleeve would go against the black night, and you wouldn't be able to see anything of me. But I also had them rigged with little ray guns, and I had a little battery with a button on it that I could push, which would activate the ray gun and make it light up. And later we would put in a buzzing sound and would, you know, when they turned on their ray guns. We also had a little turning antenna here, which was activated by another wire on top of their heads. And all right, so for when they walked, I couldn't do everything at once with these characters, but when they walked, and I used to, I think I only would show one at a time. One would be here and one would be there. When they walked, I used my fingers in their legs. When they shot the ray guns or lunged or moved with their arms, I used my two fingers in the arms. I put them into the arms and could raise an arm and shoot the ray gun and so forth. By having them that size, she was able to grab them physically and hurl them across the room. You see, and which, you know, made it far more interesting than if you were using process and she couldn't really touch them. She would one would come walking in on the window ledge and she would sweep it off with her hand and knock it right off, and you'd see it happen. You know, so it was kind of fun to have. They actually were real characters, and I played the little spaceman myself. And at the end, when she finally, you remember the story, when she finally chopped up the spaceship that they came in, which was about the size of a tabletop, and it went in at the end and it said U.S. Air Force Space Probe 1 on it. There was a voice of one of the little guys was saying, you know, don't come here, they're giants here, or something, you know, as he was being killed. And that was my voice. Because I was those guys. I was those little guys.
Oh, that's great.
I'm happy to report that Douglas Hayes, mostly known as a director and a writer, has an acting credit on IMDb for his work as the two invaders. Now, we've talked before about how Hayes was often brought in to direct whenever an episode required a bit extra, maybe more elaborate effects or a more intricate production design. The Invaders is a shining example of this. The episode is dripping with atmosphere. It's dark, it's moody, it's spooky. I mean, who among us hasn't spent a quiet evening alone at home, child or adult, and heard strange noises outside and let our imaginations get the best of us? Someone or something is nearby, preparing to break into our home and come after us. It's a common fear that comes to vivid, horrific life here. It's a testament to Hayes' direction and George Clement's lighting and cinematography that the threat being tiny little spacemen never comes across as comedic. In less capable hands, the whole thing could easily collapse. I'm looking at you, Season 5's The Fear, which is a bit of a riff on The Invaders as it concerns tiny invading aliens too. So we can agree or disagree about the plot being boring, and we can agree or disagree about the invaders being silly or awesome, but I think there's one aspect of the episode we can agree on. The original music score by Jerry Goldsmith. It's creepy, it builds, it explodes where appropriate. Like the episode, it's dark and disturbing all the way through. There's even a piece of it that reminds me a bit of Bernard Herrmann's shower scene music from Psycho. Right? I mean, it's really short, but if we loop it... Now put that under naked Janet Leigh in the shower and see how it sounds. And while you're at it, put me under naked Janet Leigh. Yeah, totally. Now, I'm not saying Herrmann cribbed that for Psycho, but, now that I'm thinking about it, Goldsmith's score for The Invaders is very similar in tone, or mood, I guess, to Herrmann's score for the Moat Farm murder radio drama. Not in specific themes or motifs or whatever, just vibe, I guess. And hey, there is a vibraphone in the mix, so there's vibe no matter what, right? Right? Yeah, okay, that was lame. I thought about putting a rim shot sound effect in there, but no, I didn't earn it. Varese Saraband must have thought pretty highly of this score. When they started releasing Twilight Zone soundtracks in the 80s, The Invaders was the very first one they presented, Volume 1, Side 1. And it just fries me that these albums aren't available anymore in any form. They came out on vinyl, then cassette, the first two anyway. Then all 5 came out on CD in Japan. In the US, we only got 2 best of CD compilations. Then they all went out of print. Then in 1999, all of the music reappeared in a 40th anniversary box set. Then that went out of print too. And you'd think, in this day and age, you could find it on iTunes, but no. You either have to buy used copies of the soundtracks on the secondary market, or buy the definitive DVD or Blu-ray sets where these scores, and many others, are isolated. The sound quality isn't quite as crisp, but it's better than nothing. La La Land Records released an awesome 3-disc CD of The Outer Limits music, not to mention a big-ass 15-disc set of every original music score from the original Star Trek. Damn it, I wish someone would give the Twilight Zone that kind of deluxe soundtrack treatment. But anyway, if it's Invaders merchandise you want, you aren't limited to hard-to-find out-of-print soundtracks.
Hey, kid, you want a toy?
Looks like a really rich 4th grader lives here.
You can collect them all, each sold separately.
Wrapped in plastic.
I am a collector.
They're action figures, not dolls.
Before Biff Bang Pow started releasing Twilight Zone-based collectibles in 2009, the only game in town was Sideshow Collectibles, who produced 12-inch action figures of a few of the more iconic TZ characters. A Canamet, which is awesome, a 2-pack of the Doctor and Nurse from Eye of the Beholder, also awesome, the Gremlin from Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, which is not awesome. In fact, it's an absolute travesty. Google it. See what it looks like. It is horrendous. And they did a life-size figure of the Invader. Life-size being in relation to a person. So it's about 10 to 12 inches tall. This is a spectacular rendition. It retailed for like $35 or so when it was new, but now goes for at least $100, oftentimes more. Especially for a mint specimen, which are getting hard to find, but not due to its scarcity. Something in the gold paint that Sideshow used breaks down over time, so many Invaders are now varying stages of green, and kind of oily, as I discovered when I opened mine. I ended up giving it a thorough cleaning, which removed most of the paint. My plan was to repaint it, and that's still my plan. One of these days I'll get to it. For now, it sits on a shelf in my office, still in the box. I mean, it still looks kind of cool even with the paint wiped off. That's how cool it is. I'll post a picture on the Facebook page. But the decomposing paint problem doesn't affect all of them. I bought my friend Bill one probably 10 years ago at least, and his is still as gold as can be.
That's not fair. That's not fair at all.
Biff Bang Pow got quite a bit of mileage out of the Invader while they were churning out Twilight Zone merchandise from 2009 to pretty recently. One of their very first items was an Invader bobblehead, which was monochrome, like most of their TZ stuff, to replicate the black and white of the series. Or I don't know, maybe it's just cheaper than painting them. There was also a limited edition gold Invader, both of which I have and love. They also did an 8-inch action figure, which was a bit weird because it used a normal human body under the armor, so the legs were too long and threw the proportions all off. There was also no freaking head under the armor, which still cracks me up to this day. Then they did a regular 3 3/4 inch action figure in both monochrome and gold. I have the monochrome one. I missed the boat on the gold one, damn it. And wow, I'm looking at one on eBay for $200 for a 3 3/4 inch figure. That's more than the life-size Sideshow version would run you. There was also a mini bobblehead designed to be stuck on top of your computer monitor. They also did a diorama of Agnes's rooftop with the C-57D and an Invader standing nearby and Agnes's face peeking out through the trapdoor. I think that's it. I think that's all the Invader stuff they did. Oh, there's one other thing. Not from Biff Bang Pow. Somebody actually sells an Invader's thong. And I don't mean the flip-flop kind of thong. Yep, that's right, a thong, as in women's underwear, featuring the Invader front and center. I covered it in my blog back in 2010, and 7 years later, it's still available. I'll put a link in the show notes. It's the perfect gift for the female Twilight Zone fan in your life. I mean, probably. I don't own a pair, so I guess I can't really vouch for it. Might be the single weirdest Twilight Zone themed item ever. If you want to look into it for yourself, see the show notes for the link. So in one corner, we have Third from the Sun, a truly great episode of the great cast, great script, great everything. One that succeeds wildly and whose only real crime is the wacky science. In the other corner, we have The Invaders, one of the most iconic and unforgettable episodes in the Twilight Zone pantheon, one with a tour de force performance at its center. Both are audacious in their own way, Third from the Sun with its unconventional photography, The Invaders for its lack of dialogue. Both have the same basic twist ending, this isn't Earth after all, and both play the twist card beautifully. Third from the Sun has a bit more going on in the plot department. A clandestine escape plan, a Big Brother type government, a race against time. But The Invaders is much richer visually. Deep shadows, flickering candles. It definitely has a superior atmosphere. Oh my god, this is hard. I've always loved Third from the Sun. The Invaders has taken a long time, like 3+ decades, to grow on me. And I cannot deny its stature in the series. It's one of the best remembered, most iconic, maybe even a bit notorious episode in the entire series. Every time the series has bowed on home video, VHS, Laserdisc, DVD, The Invaders has always been the very first episode of the very first volume. Okay, not the Blu-rays, but all the previous formats were random volumes, not chronological season sets. Well, DVD did season sets too, but not at first. And it's got the Invader. That gleaming, chunky, wonderful Invader. Two, actually. I love them. Almost irrationally so. But Third from the Sun is saying something. It's meditating on both the horrors of nuclear war and the stifling desperation of living beneath the thumb of an over-governing government. It's got something on its mind. The Invaders just wants to scare you. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I think Third from the Sun. It's just more cerebral, more nuanced. But this isn't some 10-second knockout in the first round type of bout. Both are heavyweights. This is close, people. Close. Third from the Sun takes it, but it's a hard-won victory. Regular listeners have probably noticed that new episodes of the podcast have been a bit less than regular. Erratic. Like impossible to set your watch to. Unfortunately, this is probably going to be the case for the foreseeable future. See, I'm working on a couple of really cool projects, which I'm not at liberty to discuss publicly at the moment, but will definitely be of interest to fans of a certain sci-fi show from the 60s. And it's not necessarily the Twilight Zone I'm talking about. Which show, you ask? Damn it, I can't say yet. I can say that it's a hell of an honor, and I'm kind of dying to talk about it, but for now, I must remain mum. But it's definitely cutting into my podcast time, and it will definitely continue doing that over the next few months. I'll try to get shows out at least bi-weekly, but I can't promise anything. So you can find us on Facebook and Tumblr. See the show notes for links. Our email address is zonepod@gmail.com. That's ZONEPOD. And with that, I'm Craig. This has been Between Light and Shadow, a Twilight Zone podcast. Till next time, kids, watch out for minuscule metal men menacing meanly. And as always, play nice.
Light and shadow.
Yes, hate that rock and roll rubbish.
Well, I'm afraid it's here to stay, Howie.